The title of the sermon this morning is The Use of the Rod. But really, I wanted to title it Spanking 101. First, why should I choose a theme like this? As you know, we are in a sermon series in the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs has a great variety of themes. I could choose a different one, but I believe this one is needed, even though this practice is considered by many obsolete or plainly wrong. My conclusion is, if the Bible tells us about it, it's important to talk about its wisdom. Because God's methods have to do with God's character. Because there is a great misunderstanding of who God is, this theme is needed. Some people see God as a totally lenient God that doesn't care about what we do, that sin is inconsequential, that God overlooks sin and wrongdoing in our part. On the other hand, some people see God, someone out there just to get us and punish us. So there are truths in this theme that we can learn about God, His character, and His fatherhood. He is a righteous and merciful God to all His creatures and to all human beings. But to His children, He is a loving God who, when necessary, lovingly corrects us. So my hope is that even if you don't have children, this message will help you to grow in your faith and your understanding of God. I know that talking about spanking is somewhat controversial today, even though it used to be the norm. I read in an article in Psychology Today, written by a Jewish professor, an article by a Jewish professor that he said that when he came to America some decades ago, he asked his students who had been spanked. To his surprise, most of the people raised their hand. So why isn't spanking as common today as it used to be decades ago? One reason is that corporal punishment brings bad memories to many people, even repulsive images. Many people who were spanked, they were not disciplined. They were abused. Therefore, it's hard to hear about it, let alone practice it. There are other people who have never been spanked, and because of it, consider this practice barbaric and cruel. Ted Tripp, a biblical counselor, tells the story one day he invited a friend, Nick, and his girlfriend, Angela, to eat with them. While they were visiting, one of Ted's sons misbehaved, so he stood up and took him to a private room. Angela inquired, "What's going to happen?" Ted's wife, matter of fact, said, "Probably spank him." When Angela heard the boy cry, she ran outside the house in great agitation. She felt offended and concerned about such cruelty. And that is not an uncommon response today. I believe part of the strong reaction has to do with a misunderstanding of what the Bible teaches about child discipline. It is clear in many passages in the book of Proverbs that the use of the rod is part of raising children. Proverbs 29:15 says, "A rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left to himself disgraces his mother." Before I go into the theme, I need to say that in the book of Proverbs, child discipline is varied. There is a bigger vision in the book of Proverbs to child discipline than only corporal punishment. If we could see a pie chart about child discipline, corporal punishment would be only a slice of it. In other words, spanking is not the end-all of child discipline, not by far, but it is good. I learned this as a child. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents spanked us all kids, and I knew in my child mind that it was good for me and my siblings, even as a recipient of it. The problem was that I thought that it was the silver bullet to child rearing, But one day, I realized that there is more to child discipline than just spanking. And that was one day in my teen years when I was sent to buy tortillas to the tortilla store. Yes, there's a place in Mexico that the only thing they sell is tortillas, the tortilla store. The machine is making the tortillas so they're warm, so you wrap them and take them home. Most people buy them just before lunch because they want them warm for their lunch. So the lines go outside the store. I was waiting when I saw a little kid running around, pulling little trees, jumping in the public benches, and I was thinking, what this kid needs, it's a good spanking. When I was thinking that, I hear a woman screaming at the kid. Then she approached him, grabbed him by the arm, and gave him a swat. I was so happy. I was so happy because I was thinking, he's in his way to behave, to learn to behave. But then the lady kept scolding him and hitting him. And then I realized, this poor kid, probably he gets beaten more often and in a way that is not right. So my first lesson in Spanking 101 was clear. Spanking will not solve the discipline issue. The instruction to raise children in the book of Proverbs is greatly varied. For example, Proverbs 15:5 says, "A fool spurns his father's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence." This verse, as many other in Proverbs, is really simple, straightforward, and it says to heed correction. The rod is not involved. And there are many other proverbs that tell us how to instruct, to teach, how to warn, to correct, and much more. And what we could talk about all those things that are included in Proverbs, that's not today's theme. The focus on the sermon is in the appropriate use of the rod. Even if the rod is not the main tool given to us to discipline our children. Every handyman has a toolbox. There are different tools, but if he uses the hammer all the time to drive the screws won't be happy. Neither will be the place where they need to go. There will be too much damage done to them. Today, we can say that we're talking about the appropriate use of the hammer, the rod, not because it's the best tool, but because it has been misused to cause great damage. But on the other hand, the lack of its proper use has left us extremely limited in our mandate from God to raise children. Tools make a big difference in the jobs we do. A simple job can be made really difficult if we don't have the right tools. One day I decided to change the alternator in my wife's car. This is before YouTube. So I went, bought the book and the alternator, but I only had a couple of wrenches, a small set of wrenches, and some screwdrivers. Long story short, I ended up using the lock nut wrench to put tension on the band. It was a bad job, and of course I had to take it to the mechanic. The rod is not the main tool in our toolbox, but it is an indispensable one. Let's see what Proverbs 13:24 says. "He who spares the rod hates his son, but whoever loves him is careful to discipline him." See the importance placed on the rod in this proverb. Whoever spares the rod hates his son. This is the level of importance that is given to the rod. If you love your children, you'll pay attention to use the rod and discipline them when it requires it. But let me give you another tip. This proverb says that the reason we use the rod is as an act of love, and because of that, it cannot be done in anger. Those who spank in anger many times do it because they don't want to spank. What I mean is this. Imagine that your kid is disobeying, and you know that what he's doing deserves a spanking, but you prefer not to do it. So you just give him a warning. Of course, don't pay attention. The kid doesn't pay attention. Then you threaten them, no result. You scold them, then argue with them, later scream at them. Things are still not settled. And then finally, when you can bear it no more, you spank them angrily. Wrong way to spank. Being angry and spanking is the wrong way to spank. We are to apply the rod not out of anger, but out of love. That's what this proverb says. If someone is angry or loses his temper, he should not use the rod. The rod should be reserved for specific acts or attitudes of rebellion pre-established and when specific rules are broken. Then it should be applied immediately and consistently. If I try to discipline my children with displays of anger, the child will learn to fear mom and dad, but not God. The righteous life that God desires from our children is never the product of uncontrolled anger. When we correct our children in that way, they may behave better, but the anger is not going to move our children towards God. Have I failed in this regard? Yes, many times. And for those occasions, I had to ask forgiveness from my kids. Angry spanking is always wrong. And here let me talk to those whose children are already grown and out of the house. If you corrected your children in anger, punish them unjustly, or made mistakes that you regret, it's never too late to ask forgiveness, even if the relationship is not good. As parents, we fail many times and in many ways. Our children know it, and if they know it, it shouldn't be that hard to acknowledge it, and ask for forgiveness. It might be the first step towards healing or even reconciliation. Before I continue with the theme, let me give you a little bit of background of how I was spanked when I was a child. So this is Mexican Spanking 101. In my growing years, it was common to see parents publicly disciplining their children. The classic moves, pinch, even in church, pulling the ear, pulling the hair, knock on the head, or slap on the back of the head. My father and mother never, ever did those things. They thought it was inappropriate, provoking their children to anger. So while all those things that I mentioned were culturally appropriate, my parents understood that they were biblically wrong. My parents reserved corporal punishment for only one form and only one: spanking. While they spank us, they never hit us out of nowhere, unexpectedly. It was always explained to us the reason why. We were asked if we understood the reason, not if we agreed, if we understood. Once culpability was confirmed, we received 3 hits in the most padded place of our bodies. 3, and only 3. When you are treated with dignity and you know you are guilty, most children will accept consequences for their disobedience. But if we are inconsistent, changing rules and being really strict when we are not in a good mood, or on the other hand, we let everything go when we are in a good mood, and I can see myself doing this. If we spank in the way that is wrong and at the wrong time, That is not what the book of Proverbs teaches about the use of the rod. That is not the biblical use of the rod in Proverbs. Dr. J. Adams gives an example of little Mary, how she comes home with a pretty flower that she picked up for Mommy down the stream. She comes running across the kitchen that has just been waxed, not looking at the floor, but at Mommy's face, which she hopes will light up in a burst of joy and gladness. But Mommy doesn't see the flower. She can only see the mud, which now is all over the kitchen floor. Mary is verbally torn apart, limb by limb. You know what is worse? Later that night, Mom realizes that she was so hard with little Mary, but she won't ask for forgiveness. What she would do instead is the next day, when Mary does something serious, giving a rebellious back talk or whatever else, because of the over-punishment of yesterday and her guilty conscience, she will let her get away with it. That type of inconsistency is what makes our kids go crazy. One day for nothing, little Mary got almost murdered, and later she really misbehaves and gets away with murder. Any discipline given to the children has to be done for their benefit, not because they inconvenience us or make our lives harder. If we focus on their good, that will help us to be more consistent and fairer. The purpose for spanking is to drive away folly from our children's heart. That's what Proverbs 22:15 says. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. Foolishness needs to be removed from the heart of the child. When we speak of folly, we are not talking about childishness or immaturity like Mary's. She was not mature enough to understand what she was doing at the moment. Children should not be spanked for spilling milk or making messes, but folly. Foolishness in the book of Proverbs is an attitude or actions that a person actions of a person who tried to do his will, to please only himself, someone who refuses to be under anyone's authority but his own, driven by his wants and passions, not by God's authority or the authority delegated to his parents. That's what the rod is for. Sometimes you can see a little child showing rebellion to obey. He doesn't want to be ruled. He is defiant. A child who is left alone to rule himself by folly will grow into a teenager who will not allow anyone to rule over him and who rebels against authority. This foolishness that is bound in his heart is the kind for which it is appropriate to use the rod when he is a child. The idea of using a rod sounds egregious, displeasing, or even cruel, but it's so important that it might be, in certain occasions, the only tool that will prevent a child to go to his death. Yes, to his death. The child who refuses to be under authority, it is in grave danger. Proverbs 23:13 and 14 says, "Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with the rod, he will not die. Punish him with the rod and save his soul from death." Children who do not understand consequences or learn to despise authority will act as teenagers or young men or young women in a way that will literally place them in danger of death. One warning for the parents. If you are a parent and are loving this message, because you feel like mall cop, ready to put down the law, we need to remember that disciplining children is for their benefit, not ours. Not to show authority or to show that we have our kids under control. There are parents who put the uniform and parade around, swinging their nightstick. Such an arbitrary use of God's authority is a misuse of it. Flaunting authority is always wrong. Talking about authority when there is no reason for it is failing to recognize that such authority is given for the benefit of the children, not ours. To over-discipline is like using a sledgehammer to drive thumbtacks. One more thing that I must include, otherwise one of my kids will question me afterwards. Spanking the innocent is wrong. I know that's obvious, but that's what is spanking 101. Sometimes we spank because that's the easiest thing to do. One day, instead of taking the time to learn all the facts, I just spanked my kids. One of them was not guilty. I had to ask for forgiveness, of course, and in that occasion, I had to offer some kind of restitution. You might be noticing that I'm equating spanking with the use of the rod, because spanking is not in the Bible. There is not such a verse that says, "Thou shalt spank." But in Proverbs, the rod is the instrument used to exercise physical pain. Ted Tripp says, physical punishment, the rod, is the careful, timely, measured, and controlled use of physical punishment. The rod is never venting of parental anger. It's not what a parent does when he is frustrated. It is not a response to feeling that his child has made things hard for him. It's always measured, controlled. The parent knows the proper measure of severity for this child at this particular time. The child knows how many swats are to come. That's a long definition. My mother would say the rod is the chancla. What's a chancla? Her weapon of choice. It's a flip-flop. And that's what most Hispanic mothers use anyway. This is not a paid commercial, but it's a good one. I mean, the rod. I know that wooden spools are common, but the word translated rod in the Spanish version, it's a flexible object. So it is always recommended that it is flexible, because it's helpful when kids are really little. Sometimes their reaction is cover themselves with their hands, so it's best not to use something hard. I know that using the rod sounds cruel, but physical punishment, while seems cruel to some people, it's merciful if applied properly. Dr. J. Adams says that physical punishment is better than jail time. And what he means by that is that sometimes we tell our kids, "You're grounded for a week," and it's not wrong, but sometimes while they're grounded, we show our displeasure to them. We show them that we're angry with them. But physical punishment, on the other hand, pays the debt, gives an immediate consequence, and after that, the kid doesn't have to be in the doghouse. After a spanking, he can walk free. The relationship with the parent is back to normal. So after a spanking, we should relate to our children as if they had done nothing wrong. Spanking is merciful. When my kids were little, we watched cartoons together on the computer, YouTube. We didn't have a regular TV. It was a very special time for them. One day I came home to the news that one of my kids had misbehaved, and the punishment was not to watch cartoons that day. I wanted to honor my wife's decision. But poor kid, if you could see the agony. At that time, their screen time was very limited. This was their highlight. So I wanted to help the poor kid. So I said, would you exchange your punishment for a spanking? He immediately said, yes. So we went to the room. I gave him his 3, and happily, and I mean happily, we went to watch cartoons together. Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Guess what? It happened again. And I came home, and he was the one who asked me to spank him. Since the rod is the careful, timely, measure, and controlled use of physical punishment, I only use it when my kids were younger. It has been years since I spanked any of my kids. Preteens is getting a bit too old for that. The overall goal of child discipline is that at one point, they become self-disciplined. And I'm not saying that my kids at preteens were disciplined. What I'm trying to say is that at that age, the rod is not a good tool for them to become self-disciplined. The main tool for that is communication. Communication and the rod are part of raising children. But as they grow, the use of the rod should diminish and communication increase. We can see that in the way that the Father in the book of Proverbs does it. He says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. The main tool given to us as parents to raise our children is communication, an invitation to obey, and to learn the instructions passed on to them. The father's instruction, the mother's teaching. All this for their own good, and as a reward, that's what it says, they will be a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. None of us is a perfect parent, nor did we have perfect parents, nor do we have perfect children. The incredible good news in the Bible is that has been an invitation given to us to belong to a new family where the Father is perfect. But this is not just a simple opportunity to be in a better family. It is an incredible offer extended to us. God doesn't have to extend this invitation to us because we are rebellious creatures. The epistle to the Romans says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We are sinners, undeserving of God's grace and this offer. Our actions deserve death and God's wrath. That's what the book of Ephesians says. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. All of us also live gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature objects of wrath. But God, who is loving and gracious, offers us forgiveness when we come to him in faith. Ephesians once again says, for it is by grace through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. The offer is available to us. God's grace, God's gifts, God's forgiveness, the opportunity to belong to his family, to have eternal life, to belong to him, and to be adopted by him. The sad part is that many people reject this offer, and Jesus explains why. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for the fear that his deeds will be exposed. The only reason to reject such an offer is that we love sin more than anything else. more than God. And this is what requires repentance. But you don't need to be the one who rejects this offer. You can become a child of God. God the Father himself provided a way. The book of Ephesians says, "But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved." Today we have an invitation to come to him and to be forgiven, to be transformed, to be adopted into his family by Christ's sacrifice on the cross, to become a child of God. The Apostle John says, "Yet to all who did believe him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." And as children of God, we are invited to have communion with him and with those whom he has redeemed by his blood. Today we are coming to his table to participate of the bread and the cup, to partake of his communion. So we're going to prepare our hearts for it.